Hi everyone, so I'll be reading Parrot in the Oven, Mi Vida, and this is a novel by Victor Martinez. So let's just get started. Page 1, Chapter 1, The Baseball Glove. And hopefully everybody's able to see the letters, the font. There we go. That summer, my brother Bernardo, or Nardo, as we call him, flipped through more jobs than a thumb through a deck of cards. First, he was a dishwasher, then a busboy, then a parking attendant, and finally, a patty turner for some guy who never seemed to be in his hamburger stand for more than 10 minutes at a time. Mom believed he sold marijuana or did some other illegal shamelessness. Nardo lost one job for not showing up regular enough, another for showing up too regular. The boss hated his guts. The last job lost him when the owner of the hamburger stand packed up unexpectedly and left for Canada. The job Nardo missed most through was when he worked as a busboy for the Bonneville Lakes Golf and Catering Service. He says it was the only time he ever got to touch elbows with rich people. The parties they cater serve free daiquiris, whiskey drinks, and cold beer. Really cold, in big barrels, choking with ice. At some parties like the one he got fired from, they passed out tickets for juicy prize like motorcycles, TV sets, stereos, and snow skis. The last party had a 6-piece band and a great huge dance floor, so the old fogies, as my brother called them, could get sloshed and make fools of themselves. As it turned out, he and a white guy named Brandy took off their busboy jacket and began drawing each other to get a ticket and ask a girl to dance. Randy bet Nardo wouldn't do it, and Nardo bet he would. And after a $2 pledge, he steered for the ticket lady. I could wash it around a bit, you know, Manny, he said. I could double and triple dare the guy a couple of times over, then come up with a good excuse. But that ain't my style. Instead, he tapped Randy's fingers smooth as fur and walked up the ticket lady. She peered out from behind the large butcher paper covered table at the blotches of pasta sauce of his black uniform pants and white shirt, which were supposed to go clean with their catering services, light orange busboy jacket, but didn't, and said, "Ah, what the hell?" and tore him out a tag. Before the little voice nagging inside him could talk louder, Nardo asked the nearest girl for a dance. She had about 1,000,000 freckles and enough wire in her mouth to run a toy train over. They stumbled around the dance floor until the band mercifully ground to a halt. She looked down at his arms, kind of shy-like, and said, "You dance real nice." Now my brother had what you could call a sixth sense. Es muy vivo, as my grandma used to say about a kid born that way. And with Nardo, it was pretty much a scary truth. He could duck trouble better than a champion boxer could duck a right cross. He made hairline escapes from baths, bell whippings, and scoldings just by not being around when punishment came through the door. So I believe him when he said nothing tricklish crawled over his shoulder, and when he turned around there across the dance floor In front of the band leader, about to make an announcement over the microphone, was his boss, Mr. Baxter, and boy was he steamed. Mr. Baxter owned the catering service, and sometimes my brother said the way he'll yell as the busboy, it was like he owned them too. Mr. Baxter didn't say anything, just point to the door and then at Nardo and scratched a big X across his chest. Just like that, he was fired. The way Nardo tells it, you don't think he did that man a favor working for him. Don't you ever get braces, Manny, he said, as if that were the lesson he learned. At first, Nardo didn't want to go to the fields, not because of pride, although he had used that excuse at the beginning if he could have gotten away with it. It was more because, like anyone else, he didn't like sobbing out tears of sweat in 100-degree sun. That summer was a scorcher, maybe the worst in all the years we lived in that valley desert, which of our town would be if the irrigation pump from the Sierra were turned off. I could tell how searing it was by dragging out way my mom's rose dropped every morning after I watered them. The water didn't catch hold. The roses only sighed a moment before the sun sucked even the little breather away. Although it was hard for Nardo to duck my mom's accusing eyes, especially when Magda, my sister, came home slumped from the laundry after feeding bed sheets all day into a steam press, he was refusing to work anymore. Whether one tried threats, scolding, or even shaming, which my mom tried almost every other day, nothing worked well. We all gave it a shot, but not more vigorously than my dad. He'll yell and stomped around a little space of anger. He cut in our living room, a brand of spit dangling from his lip. He declared that the walls were a good-for-nothing son. He had even dared Nardo to at least to be a man enough to join the army. He vowed to sign the paper himself since Nardo wasn't old enough. The thing was, my dad wasn't working either. He just lost his job as a translator for the city because he drank beer during lunch and slurred his words. Ever since losing his job, and even before, really, Dad had about as much patience as you could prompt on a toothpick. He was always zeroing in one thing he wanted to be disappointed in. And when he found one, he loosed a curse quicker than an eye blink. Even when he wasn't cursing, you could still feel one simmering there under his lip, really ready to boil over. Even though he worked as a translator, my dad's English wasn't the greatest. Some syllables he just couldn't catch. Instead of saying watch, he say wash. And for stupid, he slipped in a bit of Spanish, stupid. But when he said ass or ons, stretching the S was long. Lingering slowness, there was pure acid in the set of his teeth. If only Bernardo had just one ounce, my dad would say, making the tiniest measure between his thumb and forefinger, but a voice the size of our whole block. For his part, Nardo stayed home lifting weights and doing sit-ups and push-ups and nursing any piddling little pimple worth a few hours of panic. He was a nut about his handsome looks and must have tenderly combed his hair at least 20 times a day in the mirror. I wasn't like Nardo. I suppose years of not knowing what besides work was expected from a Mexican convinced me that I wouldn't pass from this earth without putting in a lot of days. I suppose Nardo figured the same and wasn't about to waste his time. But I was of my grandpa Ignacio's line of useful blood. All of his life, no matter what the job, my grandpa worked like a man, trying to fill all of his tomorrows with one solid day work. Even in the end, when he got sick and couldn't move, he hated sitting on the couch doing nothing. He fumbled around the house, fixing sockets and floor trim, painting lower shelves, and screwing legs back on tables. Although the finished chore was always more a sign of how much his mind had gotten older than anything else. For a while, I hustled fruit with my cousins Rio and Pete. Their dad, my Uncle Joe, owned a panel truck, and together we sold melons, apples, oranges, whatever grew in season, from the door to door. But when my uncle hurt his leg tripping over some tree roots and his ankle swelled up blue and tender as a ripened plum, and he couldn't walk except maybe the hobble on a leg to the refrigerator or lean over the change channels on the TV, he took the panel truck away. Without work, I was empty as a Coke bottle. School was starting soon, and I needed money for clothes and paper stuff. I wanted a baseball mitt so bad, a sweet hurt blossom in my stomach. Whenever I thought about it, baseball had a grip on my fantasies, and I couldn't shake it loose. There was an outfielder's glove in the window of Duran's department store that kept dreaming downright dangerous of the field catches. I decided to stir up Nardo to see if he'd go pick chili peppers with me. You can buy more weights, I said, a bit too enthusiastically, making him suspicious right off the bat. He looked up at me from the middle of a push-up. You think I'm lazy, don't you? No, I lied. Yeah, you do. You think I'm lazy, he said, breathing tight as he pushed up the floor. I said no. Yeah, you do. He forced air into his lungs, then got up miserably, wiping his hands. But that's all right, little boy. If you think I'm lazy, everybody else does. He started picking at a silver in his palm. I'm not really lazy, you know. I've been working off and on. He greedily bit the silver, moving his elbow up and down like a bird's wing. If Mom wants me to go, he said finally, I'll go. If that's what she wants, but I'm telling you right now, if it gets hot, I'm quitting. Miracles don't wait for doubters, so that next morning I asked my dad if we could borrow his car, a Plymouth which Nardo could drive despite the tricky gear shift. Dad was pretty cheery about me getting Nardo out of hibernation. He gave us some paint cans for the chili peppers and practically put a Christmas ribbon on the large brim hats from Mexico he bought years ago. The headbands were already dark with sweat, and the straw furry with the dust, but they protect us from the sun. When we arrived at the chili field, the wind through the window was warm on our shirt sleeves. Already the sky was beginning to hollow out, the clouds rushing toward the rim of the horizon, as even if they knew the sun would soon be the center of a boiling pot. The foreman, wearing a pale yellow shirt with a black leather vest and a cowboy boots with curled tips, refused at first to hire us, saying I was too young, that it was too late in the day. Most field workers got up at the first wink of dawn. Besides, all the rows had been taken hours ago. He laughed at the huge lounge bag bulging under Nardo's arm, and said, "We look like two kids strolling out on a picnic." Although he could fake disappointment better than anybody, deep down, I believe Nardo wanted to give picking chilies a try. But a good excuse was a good excuse, and any excuse was better than quitting. So he hurriedly threw his can into the car trunk and made a staggy flourish with his hand before opening the side door. Seeing him so spunky, I thought it's nothing less than torture when the foreman said that. Fortunately for us, there was a scrawny row next to the road no one wanted. The foreman must have thought it a big joke giving us that row. He chuckled and called us over with a sneaky offer of his arm, as if to share a secret. "Vamos, muchachos, aquí hay un surco muy bueno que pueden piscar," he said, gesturing down at some lip branches leaning away from the road, as if trying to lift their roots and hustle away from the passing traffic. The leaves were sparse and shivered, dying for air, and they had a coat of white pesticide dust and exhausted fumes so thick you could smear your hands on the leaves and rub fingertips with them. My brother shrugged his luck gone. There was not much else he could do. The foreman hung around a bit to make sure we knew which peppers to pick and which to leave for the next growing. Not it a matter in that row. We'd been picking up about 2 hours when the sun began scalding the backs of our hands, leaving a pocket of heat crawling like a small animal inside our shirts. My fingers were as rubbery as old carrots, and it seemed forever before the peppers rose to the center of my can. Nardo topped his can before I did, patted the chilies down, and lifted over his shoulder, his rock of an arm solid against the cheek. "I'm gonna get my money and buy me a soda," he said, and strode off toward the weighing area, carefully swishing his legs between the plants. I limped behind him, straining with my half-filled can of lunchless chili peppers. The weighing area wasn't anything special, just a tripod with a scale hook hanging from the center. People brought their cans and sagging burlap sacks and formed a line. After the scale point flipped and settled, having with the sacks weighed the peppers were dumped onto a wooden table bed. Tiny slits between the boards let the mix in the dirt and leaves sift through. There was a line of elder women and younger girls with the handkerchiefs across their face. They stood along the sides like trained robbers in cowboy movies, cleaning the leaves and clods of dirt, pushing the peppers down through a chute. When the sacks at the end bloated, one of the foremen unhooked it from the nails and sewed the opening. Then he stacked it on a pile near a waiting truck, whose driver laid asleep in the cab with boots sticking out in the blurry currents of air. Standing near the table bed, my eyes flared and nose dribbled a mustache of water snot. The dry leaves and angry scent of freshly broken peppers was like being swarmed by bees. No matter how hard I tried to keep my breath, even I kept coughing and choking like I had a crushed ball of sandpaper stuffed in my throat. I wonder how the women were able to stand it, even with the handkerchiefs. The only good thing about the weighing area was that they paid right after announcing your load. These lured workers from Mexico needing quick cash for rent or emergency food, and people like me who had important baseball mitts to buy. It also brought business to a burrito truck behind the scales owned by the labor contractor. It sold everything from chicken tacos, chili beans, and egg burritos to snow cones and fudge bars. The prices, though, made Nardo complain real loud. "You know how much I pay for this?" he exclaimed when all of earshots of the foreman. 85 cents. 85 cents for a damn soda. And to top it off, it's one of those cheap jobs with no fizzle or nothing. We picked steadily on, but by noon both Nardo and I were burned out, with our tongues flagging in the heat and a good sprint away from the nearest picker. Farther up, under cloud boiling like water on the horizon, a staggered string of men worked 2 and 3 rows apiece. "They're wetbacks," my brother explained. "They pick like their goddamn lives depend on it." I looked over at the Mexican man working on the rows next to ours and nodded agreement. He handled 4 rows all by himself, using 2 cans and trading handfuls from one can to another. He got up 2 rows, then down 2 rows, greeting us in his return with a smile and shy wave. To save time, he placed burlap sacks every 20 feet, and every half hour or so he poured a loaded can into the closest. Behind him, their sacks already lay fat and tidy stone. We eyed him, amazed by his quickness. "Maybe that's what we should do," I suggested. Nardo shook his head. "Are you crazy?" he asked with conviction. "'Till take us the whole damn day just to fill one lousy sack?" He was right. We weren't the best pickers in the field. We weren't even close to being the worst. We stopped too much, my brother to eye the girls near the weir, and me to watch the man and compare hands. His were wings in a blur of wonder. Mine stir a pot of warm honey. The way he moved too made me think he made a terrific shortstop, that with the way he shifted from plant to plant, his knees like a triangle, tilting first one way then another. He was a whirlwind when gathering up his cans and burlap sacks, and eyeing him this way with a admiration almost made me forget my own tiredness. Although he never seemed to tire, never seemed to rise much above the plant, but hid inside the quivering leaves until, with one flickering toss, a rain of yellow peppers showered the air and dropped into his can. I was marveling at him when Nardo tapped me on the shoulder. "Look what's coming," he said, pointing his chin at the van creeping up the road. Cars had been insulting us with the dust and exhausted fumes all morning, so when I saw how this van approached like a dog sneaking up on a bush, I knew something was wrong. The van was green, a dim star for light, green like the leaves on our rose. Its windows were open, and the man behind the wheel had his head out of scanning the rows. Suddenly, people began to stand up, licking the air and stretching as if peering over the high wall. There was fast talking in Spanish and frenzied commotion, and suddenly 40 or so people all at once jumped up and started running. They didn't even bother going through the furrows and scissor steps like Nardo had done, but ran into waves, tumbling over plants and tripping over cans. Those last to run brought up the rear, sitting their hats with one hand and trashing their snapped up coats in the other. So right here, that van, because I have worked in the fields, I'm pretty sure that was immigration. So as they call it, la migra. I think that's what it is. Let's continue. I still didn't know what was going on. My first thought was to run, but when I saw 3 more vans and a large labor bus pop out of a narrow road in the cornfield bordering ours, I knew that immigration had come for the people. No one had seen the other vans place themselves at points along the cornfield. These people just ran wildly in panic toward them as if their first thought was to hide in the stalks. The quicker ones got caught at once, their paths cut off by the officers holding out their arms. They surrendered without a word. The slower ones veered off into the open spaces of the corn and dove into the field. Most people were caught in the first sweep, except for some who ducked under the arms of the officers and hustled down the road. But they too were quickly run down by another van and escorted inside. The handful who hid in the corn stalks seemed they had gotten away. We all cheered and waved our arms as if our side had won. Some of us jeered at the officers, my brother Nardo the loudest. Everyone quiet down, though, when some of the officers formed a line along the fields and disappeared into the stalks. A while later, they came out yanking on their shirt collars out of those who thought had gotten away. Everybody sighed and said nothing. The foreman who given us the scraggly road rushed over to see what was going on. He took off in a huff, saying, "Son oba bitches," and worse. I thought he was going to cuss those immigration guys off, but instead he stood by meekly watching the officers corral the people before loading them into the vans. I tried to find the Mexican on the row next to ours, but I didn't see him. I hoped he gotten away. The officer in charge approached the foreman and said something we couldn't make out, but it sounded like a scolding. The foreman came back and knelt down by the water tank. "Damn son of bitches," he said again, flicking his hat off and raising dust as he slapped it against his pant leg. He poured himself some water and glared over at the immigration officers as they packed in the people and roared off in a boiling cloud of dust. A crowd stood around, covering our eyes. No one bothered to go back to work. When their air cleared, a man tottered back from the spot where the van had assembled. He was an elder man with salt and pepper stubble on his chin and slightly longer and darker mustache. He was nursing his right knee. At first, I thought maybe he gotten away, but then someone recognized him and laughed. "Hey, Joe, you're not a wetback, you're a bracero." Joe came slowly over and took off his hat and covered his stomach as if he'd been caught naked. He shrugged an apology and said he couldn't help it when everyone else began to run. He got so excited he ran too. He looked down at his legs as if they betrayed him. He said immigration let him go as soon as they saw he had too much meat on his bones to be a wetback. Everybody laughed. Then his family, whose confused uncle he was, came over and led him away. Nardo and I laughed too, but for some reason, I thought he was the best man in the whole field. Of the 20 or so people left, everyone claimed they encouraged the Mexicans not to run. They said immigration guys usually don't go in the fields to check for citizenship unless they have a good reason. If you act like you belong, sometimes you could fool them. They said none of those ungrateful took them at their word through, and they had only one themselves to blame. One of the listeners, a tall, pimple-faced guy with blotchy cheeks and the skin of a fig, only paler, shouted out, and that's just a bad word. I'm not going to say it. I know what it means. I just know it means like something, and then it's Caucasians, that word. And I don't like to say those words, so I'm not going to read it. Don't give a damn about harassing us. Do what they want. He didn't wait for anybody to answer back, nor did he pick up any cans or equipment, but walked quickly away, swung open the door of a rusty Buick and drove off. I guess he came alone, Nardo said musingly. He rubbed his eyes with the backs of his wrists, then became more alert. Hey, we can't pick on any row we want now. That man's crazy. Those people don't live here anyway, he said a short, moist-faced guy with the tie bunched in cheeks and pants that settled unevenly around his waist. When he walked, one of his legs looks like shorter than the other. He went over the one of the road a Mexican had been picking and lifted up a pair of old shoes. The soles were crusted with mud and the leather scars and furrow like the faces of old men who worked in the fields all their lives. He held them at the tip of his fingers and away from his precious nose. The man who wore them probably had taken them off in the heat to stick his toes in the moist, irrigated soil. A small chorus of laughter went up when he held them high, then fell when he drove back to the earth. He rummaged somewhere down to the road until he found a sack bulging with chili peppers. "Hey, I'm gonna keep this," he declared, and began dragging the sack. When everyone saw this, they all began to scramble around for other abandoned sacks, claiming theirs right by how closer their rows had been to the Mexicans beside them. The sacks belonging to the man working on the road next to us were laying tightly sewn on their sides. Nardo walked over and placed his hands on one of them. Two other guys came over to argue about whom the other belonged to, but my brother was stronger, and after some half-serious pushing and shoving, they walked away grumbling. "Look, Manny," Nardo said excitedly. And I lost the other word. Spearing up his shirtless. He lifted one sack by its ears and pounded it on the ground, packing the peppers down its belly. "We got more here than I'll take us 2 days to pick. Hey, you can't even buy your mitt." I thought of the baseball glove, all clean and stiff and leather smelling, and of myself in the cool green lawn of our field. I imagined already being on the baseball team at school and people looking at me. Not these people picking chilies or those sent away in the vans, but people I had yet to know watching me as I stood mildly in center field. I looked down at the sacks, then far out in the distance at the clouds of dust folding and unfolding where the vans were pulling away. I wonder how long I have had to work to fill those sacks. The weariness of it stretched as wide as the horizon. End of chapter 1.